too old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you.
And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I hope you've brought your tea made by the Jedi Tea Council, because we are the Jedi Council that are graying. And we're excited because this is our 10th episode, and we are again venturing into the storytelling universe of Andor, starring, of course, Cassian Andor, aka...
Wait, I missed that because I was coughing. What?
Diego Luna?
Cassian Andor.
Oh.
Portrayed by... Thank you.
Diego Luna?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Diego Luna. And, all these Star Wars names are hard to pronounce, including the actors. Go figure. But, a very exciting episode. We are moving into the fourth, therefore the next trifecta of episodes, where Cassian Andor is now off the Junker world / mining world and into the world of the Rebellion. I very much look forward to our dissection by Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. And as a first-time viewer, I have to say that this episode really tapped into a lot of those things I've wanted to see in the, shall we say, behind-the-scenes Star Wars action of the galaxy. So, without further ado, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, illuminate us on what brings us into the fourth episode of Andor.
Thank you, Master UrzaMaster. Thank you, Master Lord Uther. And thanks to you at home and abroad and in galaxies far, far away. This is our 10th Graying Jedi. It is our 4th following and chronicling Andor. The episode is called Altani, and it first aired on September 28th, 2022. As Master referenced, the show was designed in almost like Lego blocks, in which episodes and storylines would extend and carry over into little mini trilogies, and then a new storyline or arc would come forward. So you might feel surprised when you actually watch episode 4, because it actually feels like a different show. Like we have gone in a completely new environment. We have not 1, not 2, but 9 new characters that make their first appearances in this episode alone, while at the moment leaving other characters that we've already come to know, like B2 EMO and Bix Colleen and Marva, completely off camera and for the moment sidelined by these new developments in this saga. So it can be a little disconcerting, a little jarring, but wow. If the first 3 episodes were all about world building and the world of Ferrex and the corporate sector, this is The Heist. One of my favorite of all storytelling devices and arcs. Let's get a team together and let's plan a robbery. Everything from The Italian Job and Ocean's 12, even Gene Hackman and Danny DeVito going head-to-head in David Mamet's Heist. We have seen over the years in both film and television this play out, depending on your point of view, with much fanfare and success. And the key is in the details. And this episode does not spare us any of those details. So this episode 4, as well as the next 2, will be directed by Susanna White, her first appearance on the show. She is a British television and film director. Her most notable film credit, she did the sequel to Nanny McPhee with Emma Thompson. Wait, there was a sequel to Nanny McPhee? Yes, there was. It came out in 2000.
I don't even know the original movie, so whatever.
It came out in 2010. Star Wars veteran Ewan McGregor, I believe, was in Nanny McPhee Returns, as it was called here in the stateside. It made a ton of money in its native lands, not so much in this country, but don't blame Emma Thompson for that. She's divine. So Susanna White directed that. She also has worked for the BBC, doing an updating of Jane Eyre. She's worked for HBO, doing Generation Kill, an Iraq War set miniseries that is harrowing, gripping, and very much recommended. Also did episodes of Boardwalk Empire, their 30s set Prohibition gangster saga. And then she moved over to Showtime and did episodes of Billions, and Masters of Sex. So she is well versed behind the camera, and she will be taking us on the Aldani heist. The writer, at least half his name probably seemed familiar. It's Dan Gilroy. Now, Dan is the brother to Tony. Dan has a fraternal twin, John, and if you've been watching the credits and not skipping them, you'll note that John Gilroy is editing the series. So it is truly a family affair with Tony as showrunner creator, his brother Dan pitching in on the screenwriting, and his Dan's fraternal twin John doing the crisp editing that we are enjoying. But Dan is a successful writer in his own right. Most recently, he contributed to Kong Skull Island, which was much, much more entertaining than it had any right to be. And if you haven't seen Kong Skull Island and said, I'm not watching a King Kong movie set in Vietnam, that's how I felt. And then I watched it, and it was ridiculously entertaining. So Mr. Gilroy was credited with that. He did a Jake Gyllenhaal thriller about the underside of television news called Nightcrawler. Had nothing to do with the X-Men, but he wrote and directed that. He wrote and directed a courtroom drama with Denzel Washington a few Thanksgivings ago called Roman J. Israel Esquire, with some crackling writing.
That was also good.
He contributed to Real Steel with Hugh Jackman. He got his start. He got his start doing a somewhat silly Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Anthony Hopkins futuristic thriller called Free Jack. And the reason I bring up Free Jack from 1992 is it's where Dan Gilroy met his once future and current wife. He is married to Renee Russo, whom you will remember from Lethal Weapon, Major League, and any number. So the Gilroys are a blessed bunch, and Dan is married to Renee, and that's why she was in Nightcrawler as the ambitious TV journalist, and so on and so forth. So that was Dan.
Fantastic.
Now I mentioned that there were nine new characters that show up in this episode. The biggest by far is Senator Mon Mothma, who is played by Genevieve O'Reilly. Initially, she was cast. Mon Mothma was a character introduced in 1983's Return of the Jedi. Genevieve O'Reilly was brought in to play her slightly younger version in Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3. But many of her scenes with Senator Amidala, Natalie Portman, and Senator Organa, played by Jimmy Smits, ended up on the cutting room floor. They can still be viewed on the DVDs and Blu-rays if you have Revenge of the Sith in those formats, and perhaps even on the streaming versions. But most of her screen time was cut for that picture. She returned in Rogue One, once again, with a severe haircut and leading the Rebel Alliance from the Yavin 4 base right before the Death Star interceded. She voiced the character of Mon Mothma for Star Wars Rebels and Dave Filoni in an episode, and she returned the favor again, appearing live action in Dave Filoni's Ahsoka, which we just covered here on The Graying Jedi. So basically, when you think Mon Mothma these days, you're thinking Genevieve O'Reilly. And I will just say briefly, we learned more about that character and who she is and her dynamic in this single episode of Andor, then she was allowed to really express herself more of a figurehead rebel leader, cut from a very stock cloth in all of the others. And we'll talk about Mon Mothma a little later in the show. But wow, as far as suddenly the character, it's such a good turn that when you go back and watch a Rogue One or an Ahsoka, then you have a completely different appreciation for who that character actually is and what she stands for. We also met briefly, and we will see her more, spoiler alert, Cyril's mother, Edie, played by Catherine Hunter, a woman who will greet her now unemployed son with a harsh slap across the face and then a motherly hug. And so she will be a factor. We met the Major in the Imperial Security Bureau, played by Anton Lesser, also a Game of Thrones alumnus. And nobody runs a staff meeting like the Major. We'll talk about that. And we also met Dedra, who works in the ISB and reports to the Major. And her character is a fascinating one. There's so much to discuss. And then finally, Cassian has been recruited by the rebellion to commit crime, to rob an Imperial payroll for an entire sector. And he's being thrown in with a ragtag bunch of rebels, none of whom trust him, none of whom know him, and yet they're placing their lives on the line, presumably with his participation. And so we meet Vel and Cinta and Skeen and Nemec. These are all members of the team that are going to be infiltrating an Imperial garrison and making off with their payroll while not getting caught by troopers, TIE fighters, and the like. You might recognize Skeen. He's kind of the quiet, hulking one in the background right now. Got a sort of a dodgy look about him. That's played by Eben Moss Bacharach. You would recognize him from the terrific Hulu show The Bear as Cousin Richie. He also did a nice cameo in the Jennifer Lawrence, Matthew Broderick comedy this summer, No Hard Feelings. So he's one to watch. I didn't even mention Luthen, who is a master of disguise and fronts an art gallery on Coruscant when he's not out acting like the stern rebel commander. And he puts on a wig and an affectation as a delightful showman. And he's got an assistant, Clea, who also will play a factor in later narratives and so forth. And so those two are operating in plain sight while trying to match the rebellion's foot soldiers with the funding, courtesy of Senator Mon Mothma. But that's also now coming under close scrutiny. So, folks, like I said, so much to go. And I think Jedi Master, UrzaMaster, having experiences for the first time during this cycle as we go through Andor, I'd like to hear his and Lord Uther's thoughts about how this very grown-up, very adult Star Wars took another leap forward here. And once again, of all the things we'll probably say about this, I'm not saying it's inappropriate for children. I'm just saying that they probably will leave the room. This is not made for the 6-year-olds who will soon be on your porch with lightsabers asking for Halloween candy. This is, grown-ups only, and not because it has racy language or extreme violence or anything like that. It's just such a compelling adult drama that I just don't know that Go ahead, Lord Uther.
No one's going to be running out and buying a Luthen action figure.
Well, there you go.
Probably what is not going to. Well, I would, yeah, that's true. But I don't think my 13-year-old son or my 11-year-old daughter will be doing that. But anyway, Urza Master of Masters, Urza.
Well,
whatever.
If I may,
I'll let you go. But yeah,
I was blown away yet again. This show has done exactly what I've always wanted to see with a Star Wars, anything, movie, TV show, whatever. It's brought in that sort of, I almost want to call it like a political drama. It's like a House of Cards or a West Wing Star Wars episode. And you get this nuanced, layered method of storytelling, which I really deeply appreciate from, I say adult-oriented, but that kind of gives it that AO rating connotation, and I don't mean that. I mean something literally oriented towards adult tendencies, like, you know, reading the newspaper kind of thing, not, you know, taking off of the clothing. Which, I mean, you know, they don't need to do to make it compelling, which is such a refreshing thing to see. Because I feel like when people craft shows these days, and they're trying to appeal to an audience of 18 plus, they aim for the lowest brow to maximize the dollar. This is not like that at all. They are aiming for this beautifully crafted storyline of layered political intrigue and layered non-Jedi versus the Empire storytelling. And that is so refreshing. And, you know, for as much as I want it to be lightsabers and X-Wings and Y-Wings and A-Wings and AT-AT walkers and Ewoks, like, I really like seeing this. I can't gush enough over, you know, Luthen and his goofy disguise, but it's perfect for the character he plays. It suits exactly who he comes off as, and the flip of the switch where he becomes, you know, the rebel behind the scenes with Mon Mothma in the back of the art gallery is just, oh man. I mean, that was like, it gives you chills.
And how he browbeats Val into accepting Cassian on, I mean, he's got a story for everybody. He tells Cassian, you know, this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to pay you all of that. And then he goes out to Val and, like, he's, you know, he barks at her. Look at me. This is, you know, you're a child. I've just bought you, you know, redundancy. Like, you should be thanking me. Stellan Skarsgård just, yeah.
The command Stellan Skarsgård has of the sequences he's in is rarity for the silver screen or the small screen. There's nothing more you could say about that praises it enough. It's just, I love him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Disney can do no wrong with their casting. I mean, and I'm not saying that because I'm pandering to anybody in the room. I'm saying that because they make unbelievable choices, and they always seem to hit. Mon Mothma, the casting there, and getting the same actress from Episode 3 and having that continuity really lends credence to the franchise. Not to mention the fact that she comes across as, you know, like Julia Louis-Dreyfus on Veep, or the name escapes me on House of Cards. I forget. But
yeah,
gravitas.
His wife, right? Yes.
Yes, and just this presence that feels so very real, but so
Robin Wright.
Yeah, just like on the razor's edge, you know, and playing the right part for the right reasons, despite the obvious, you know, horrific danger she's in, and then having a spouse like she has, which, I mean, we can't not mention the obvious political marriage that's going on there. And it's Coruscant. Like, this is what I, as an adult, always imagined Coruscant to be, is this, like, very House of Cards-esque living space for all of these politicals and these, you know, special interests and these lobbyists. And it's Capitol Hill turned into its own planet with, by the way, if you're familiar with Greater Canon, a dark underbelly literally below the cloud line. I hope they get into that. I don't know.
And that's what I love when we see Cyril, who's been disgraced and fired and all of that from his job. He returns to Coruscant, and we see him descend. And it's not, I mean, it's not as if there's assassins sitting there with cigarettes, you know, accosting him.
Right.
But you can see that Mon Mothma lives up here, and here is Cyril, the middle class or even lower middle class, forced down here in the shadows. There's almost no light. It's just a very depressing architecture to it, all of the same brutalist style. Like, I just love how you can just tell the story of who this guy is or where his situation is. Just by
Well, it feels very Soviet era,
yes,
like construction. Like it feels like he is that party member that worked his butt off to get all the way up the corporate ladder and ingratiate himself with the KGB. And now he's getting knocked down a few pegs, and he's, again, this is the story. The whole story is of radicalization. You know, in whatever direction you end up going, how do you get there? This is how you get there. You grow up in the block, and you ingratiate yourself with the party. I mean, it is a. I mean, especially having grown up in the very early post-Soviet era, like this is the Rocky IV of Star Wars for me. Like this is pretty freaking awesome stuff, and like it doesn't need Rocky versus Ivan Drago. Like you can tell a lot more story if you take the main part out of it and tell everything around it. And we talk about the future of Star Wars a lot, and I know this show's been out for a little while. But these are the types of things, the types of stories you could absolutely, it's boundless. You have no limit to the stories you can tell within the bounds of, 4, 5, and 6, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or somewhere in between there. It's a lot of history that goes on outside of the Skywalkers. So I was also very intrigued by the sort of Scottish Highlanders who are leading this rebellion. And of course, it's just like Sean Connery going to the Highlands to rescue Connor MacLeod from the Clan MacLeod. And, here's Cassian Andor getting dumped off in the Highlands, and you cannot die, you stupid fool. It's going to succeed, because the whole show is called Andor, and he appears in Rogue One, so it's like, I can't wait to see how they pull it off. I don't care that I know the end. That's the coolest thing that I think this show does, is like, we know where this is going, but it's still really, really good. And that's something where, like, the prequels, if I may, are unsuccessful, because we know where things are going with Anakin Skywalker, but telling that story was not crafted in a way that was as compelling as what we're seeing with Cassian Andor.
Yes. With that said, if you want a masterclass in dialogue, look no further than Luthen and Cassian on the ship as they're flying to their destination, and the way Luthen takes someone who thinks he's very street smart like Cassian and just molds him into what's going to be a rebel, right? I mean, he totally manipulates him, knowing his background, knowing that Cassian lied about being in that battle, right? Like, he knows all those little pieces. And we've talked about radicalization, and I think that was UrzaMaster who brought that up. And I think it was Master Psyllium Maas. But anyway, we all jumped on board the radicalization piece. And it's fascinating because I think I had a really good conversation with a friend of mine yesterday about some things that are going on in the world. And he said, we might be so far removed from certain events that we can't relate to what's going on or totally understand what's happening. I don't think we really know what it means to be radicalized. And I think we're seeing how it happens. To me, I also call it selling. Like, Luthen sold Cassian on doing all of this stuff. Like, it's a sell job. It's like I say when I teach, I got to sell the kids. They got to buy into what I'm doing, right? And so we see a masterclass in that. And I think it's some of the best dialogue in that episode. Maybe not the entire series, but it definitely stands out. because you can just see that manipulation happen. And it's almost like Cassian goes, he's like, oh yeah, I do hate them. I should join this. I mean, you can almost see him going through those phases of understanding that he is this person that Luthen thinks he is, even though he didn't, at the beginning, Cassian wasn't on board with it. So I think it's just fantastic. I also love that I hadn't seen a TIE fighter or a stormtrooper, which we still haven't seen a stormtrooper yet, but we finally saw a TIE fighter.
And I'm going to jump right on that. This show does something I never thought it would do, and it makes a TIE fighter scary again on how they presented it. Like, sudden, the volume, it's very quiet, and all of a sudden it screams across the atmosphere with that familiar TIE fighter sound. I never thought a TIE fighter could be, like, unnerving after being exposed so many times in the cartoons and but my God, when that jumps across, yes.
And I'll add one more thing in here. We're talking about we love a good heist movie. That's why Solo was a great film. That film got lambasted. I think it was a setup, quite honestly. But I mean, like, that was a good movie. I think it was a fantastic movie. And why? Because part of it was a heist, which you want to see. I mean, it's good stuff.
It's just robbing the train. It's always fun. Even if it's not like the best story, it's always fun. Passenger 57.
When this episode...
Firefly, one of the best episodes of Firefly was when they were literally taking a part of a train. Like, they were going to take it.
Yeah.
By the way, talk about a podcast we should do. Firefly is...
When this episode ends of The Graying Jedi, we're actually going to plot our own heist, because it's like a bucket list thing. We need to figure out and then assign code names and have little diagrams so
if you want to be part of that heist, add a comment below and click that subscribe button, and make sure to share us with all your friends and family so that we don't ever... Wait a minute, we're going to get caught in this heist. Well, you should still subscribe.
I love again, Luthen. I won't even say he's two-faced, but he tells Cassian, "You're important. I came for you." And then he goes out and tells Vel out of earshot, "Hey, he's disposable. I'm renting him." And what I thought was great is Vel, the leader of this heist, who's been placed in charge of it. She's upset. They've been eating dirt and sleeping on stones, and he's getting paid 200,000 credits. And Luthen just matter of fact about it. I'm paying him. Watch her later in the episode where the same suspicions are cast upon, well, who is this guy? Why is he coming in so late? How are we supposed to trust him? She sticks her neck out for someone she's literally just met and doesn't trust herself. And it's a phenomenal acting job, as Uther is talking about. Like, when you hear her defend him, it's almost as if they were lifelong pals and grew up together. And you know that she doesn't even believe what she's telling them, but she has to as the leader. Otherwise, the whole thing, falls apart. So I thought that was a tremendous moment for this character that we're just introduced to, as far as I trust,
And Luthen plays on that, right? Because he's like, and that's how he gets her. Like, talk about a manipulator. Because she's arguing with him, and he goes, "You want to lead? This is part of leading." Like, he just goes right at her with it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you're right." And she's got to buy into it again. Again, buying what he's selling.
Exactly.
It's so key.
And when he meets with Mon Mothma, under the guise of buying her husband a birthday present, and I love the political husband who is jamming her up at home by inviting people to dinner that she wants nothing to do with and doesn't agree with politically, and her Imperials who are, creating havoc under the guise of authority. I love when he says, like, "Rumor has it you bought me a present," and she snaps, "It's going back." I just love that's a telling moment on their marriage and her character and so forth. But when Luthen and Mon Mothma are there, and this will be explored a little bit further in episodes, I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but you can already see the seeds planted in this conversation. So she's the political face, right? She's not directly tied to the rebellion, and she's been moving money and drawing upon her stores to give to agents like Luthen, who then spread it around various cells and various, mini plots, if you will, throughout the galaxy. So she's the respectable face and is trying to maintain that plausible deniability that I have anything to do with this. Of course, it's all just accounting and, all of that. But it's the contrast, right? And again, we will explore this probably further down the road. It's the contrast between what she thinks the rebellion is, which is I write a check or I deliver funds, and what Luthen is doing, which is I'm getting my hands dirty. I've got people out there who depend on me. I need the money that you promised, or else this whole thing goes belly up, and then they can turn on us and turn us in. And I mean, so it's a fascinating dichotomy set up about sort of like, what Mon Mothma thinks she's doing. It's a noble cause. We talked about the cause versus what it takes to actually, get the job done. And Luthen is nothing more. He is a ruthless pragmatist. Like, I don't believe anything exists for him but the cause, based on how we've met him early. There is no individual or institution that he will support except this rebellion against the Empire.
But is he really getting his hands dirty? He's helping the other people. He's helping them get their hands dirty. He's that centerpiece. He's helping that wheel turn, and by he's the middleman, right?
Right.
He's that pivot point, which leads me to this question, and hopefully you two can kind of jump in on this. How much, at what point or what cause are you willing to sell your soul, in a sense, to see your cause happen? Because we're starting to see some of that, right? Like, how far are you willing to go? Are you willing to manipulate people? Are you willing to lose people? Are you willing to lie out of both sides of your mouth for your cause? He's telling Cassian how he got there for him, and like you said, he's telling, what's her name, Vel?
Vel.
How he's expendable. She's lying to her people. Oh, I can vouch for this guy. Like, how far are you willing to go for the cause? I guess that's my question. I mean, are we seeing it? I don't know. Well, what do you guys think?
I think that's any rebellion, right? I mean, if you're... I'm reminded, as I often am, of a great Cillian Murphy movie. The Wind That Shakes the Barley.
Yes.
Where are your real lines? Are you truly fighting for a cause, or are you trying to find a way to quickly end the conflict? Are you a Sinn Féin, or are you really aiming for an ideal? And I think that's the beauty of the story being told here, is that we don't know yet. We don't know. Does Mon Mothma want a quick end to the Empire to bring back just the Senate? Or does Mon Mothma want something greater than that? Does Luthen want to be kind of this influential merchant type, shady middleman, warlord type? Or, does he really have a dedication to, power to the people? And that's something that... I think at every level of rebellion in Star Wars, and it's all allegory, right? So like it's a great, do I say Campbellian, Joseph Campbell type myth of setting up the life cycle of the hero, because what we're seeing, none of these characters are heroes, none of them. They're all flawed, human, realistic portrayals of people. They are not the, how do I want to put it? They are not the Skywalkers. They are not the epitome of hero's journey. They are not the epitome of the Sith. They're not the villains either. They are the cogs in the machine that have to play their role to whatever end that may entail. And that's why it can be so appealing to an adult audience.
So, at what point does it make it different from the Empire? I'm sorry, but at what point does it disseminate? and make it different. What
I think
makes
that's,
them right?
I think that's the point. I think that's the point he's trying to show, is that when you get down to the grassroots and the weeds, the rebellion, might employ ruthless tactics or all of that, as such as the Empire. Look at the Empire from the ISB, which we were introduced to here. This very sterile bureaucracy where they all have meetings and quarterly reports that are due, and you'd never know from the Star Wars that we grew up with Star Destroyers raining down, attacks on planets and TIE fighters intercepting, and you would never know that what we see in the ISB, like any of that is going on. Like this feels like, a well-run office with people who will stab you in the back if you, get out of your lane. And that's how we made Dedra, who we can see right away is a comer. She is not going to be restrained by office protocols or niceties. And she's drawn into this because the Starpath unit that Cassian was trying to fence ended up being stolen from another sector that she had jurisdiction over. Ergo, she tries to elbow her way in here. One of her co-workers says, "Hey, not so fast. She's already got enough on her plate. Tell her to leave me alone." And for the moment, the hires at B agree, but he gives her the little pep talk and says, "You have to be better than everybody else. That's why you're here." And so it's fascinating because we're not conditioned to hate Dedra upon first meeting her. Like we see somebody who's, like we might imagine ourselves if we were trying to climb the corporate ladder, if the corporation was the Empire. Like this is not somebody that you're saying, oh, they slaughtered younglings, and they must be, because don't forget, this is all, post Episode 3, and the Jedis have been driven away and, thought extinct, and the children were slaughtered by Anakin and so forth. Like a lot of crimes and atrocities here on this very planet, and yet, like I say, she takes a briefcase. If they had the intergalactic version of Starbucks, she'd probably be sipping it on her way in. And I just love the idea of presenting the Empire as something other than just this oppressive Darth Vader on the bridge. We will find the rebel spies and destroy them. To UrzaMaster's point, like this is what was really going on, right? The camera was over here on the Skywalkers, giving us all the highlights and the pod racing and the duels and all of that on Dagobah and Cloud City and Hoth. But here's where the real rubber met the road: is did you get your quarterly reports in? And that's, to me, like I say, that doesn't get the action figures sold, but it sure makes for compelling inner office bickering.
Well, go ahead, UrzaMaster.
I hate to say it, but that's kind of what makes this more entertaining than even the original Star Wars movies, is because it feels so real life. The evil of the Empire is really the evil of corporate, living. You're the copier. If there's an episode about a copier breaking, like this is Office Space, really. And that's it. It's almost comical in a way. It's so real life, despite being sci-fi. In a galaxy far, far away, they still have corporate bureaucracy bullcrap. The people who are looking to climb the ladder as fast as possible, or who are so deep in the Kool-Aid, like our young lieutenant deputy. Yeah, that's the real plotting nature behind evil, and that's if you want to go with the archetype, you can watch 4, 5, and 6. But if you want to go with the real life, that's Andor. And the real rebellion here is the people who just don't want central government, I guess. Are they really aiming to bring back the Republic, or do they just not want the Imperials mucking up their game on whatever planet or sector they're in? And that's, Uther, you bring up a really good point. Like, which is actually worse if you think about it? And that's the future of Star Wars, is telling those stories, because they're definitely pre Return of the Jedi. There are definitely worlds, sectors, large swaths of people who probably did very well under the Empire, who may not be evil at all. They're just people. They may even be very good people, who took care of masses of hungry, starving children. And then all of a sudden, the Empire vacuum is there, and they're like, oh no, what do we do now? This darn rebellion, we want the First Order. And that's how the First Order rises. You get that ebb and flow, and that's the cyclical nature, which Ahsoka does so well of addressing. And also, somehow, this all ties back to the wind that shakes the barley. Like, I hate to say it, but this is the whole argument of, are you going to sign the Doyle? Or are you going to work for something new, different, and better? I mean, this is Balin's storyline. This is setting the foundation for what we see in Ahsoka, which is amazing. So watching this after seeing Ahsoka, I'm like, mind blow here and there. Even though this occurs so far before that series, it's incredible, really. It's really... Like, when we say this is a show for adults, it's almost more than that. Because adults can go out and enjoy the Star Wars, right? The Star Wars, as they called it back in the day. Because it's an entertaining show. It's a love story. It's hero's journey, all that fun, romantic stuff. This is really the world-building type story. This is sitting down and grinding out a D&D campaign over months and months with your buddies. Like, this is where you truly can escape reality, only to realize that it's still reality. You still go to the bar, and you still strike out with the attractive barmaid. Like, you still go to the office, and you still strike out when, the person with a little more tenure than you decides you're getting too uppity and layeth the smack down upon thee, kind of thing. I mean, it's fun in a way that really sounds like it shouldn't be fun, and it's refreshing to see a franchise take a risk like that. It's kind of like, say, a Star Trek series coming up with an animated slapstick TV show.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and this is what we've wanted, right? We 1 through 9 were so black and white, good and bad, which is, and I'm going to say,
and mythology,
justifiably. Yeah. Well, yeah, justifiably so. I'm going to say that, right? But that's what we were loving about Ahsoka, is that we really think this cycle is going to be broken. I mean, my dog is even barking and agreeing with me right now upstairs.
Arf, arf, woof,
arf,
woof.
Arf. Which, and UrzaMaster, you're still a youngling yourself. Obviously, Master Psyllium Maas and I are a little bit older. And now that I'm older, I really question, what's evil? What's bad? What's good? I mean, what makes the Empire worse than what the Rebellion's going to be, or the New Republic is? Because we even see it in Ahsoka. They start getting bogged down in their own mess, too. So what is right and what is wrong? Now, obviously, I don't advocate for evil people, but when we're talking about, like what you're saying, you've got Vader up here and Palpatine up here, and they're doing their thing. But
you got them over here, and they're going to run around over here on Mustafar, and
but you've got millions
and millions
of people supporting Palpatine and Vader. I mean, that's what we're getting. And again, like you said, it might just be the guy trying to make a credit so he can make his payment and feed his kids some sloppy cereal in the morning. Like, what I mean,
green milk or blue milk.
Oh God, don't even. I cannot wait to argue with Psyllium Maas about those movies. But I just think it's bringing so much of that to the forefront, and that's what makes. And let me tell you something, Master UrzaMaster of UrzaMasters, it's going to get so much better. Which I didn't think it could. And I was kind of reflecting on that today, watching this a second time around. Like, oh, I wonder if this can get better, and it just gets so much better. So much better.
We pointed out in last week's episode, Nicholas Britell's score, that he redid the title sequence 12 times for each episode. So I don't know if anyone was listening this week, but this one was emphasized with pounding drums. which was different than the strings, which was different than the synthesizers, but again, the same chords and the same melody can be discerned when listening properly. Using location filmmaking, and again, I love how Lucasfilm and ILM have developed the stagecraft and being able to create just about any environment that they can, imagine in order to allow scenes, from Ahsoka and Kenobi and the Mandalorian and so forth. And it's technology, it's visionary and it moves storytelling forward. But having said that, and we mentioned this with the sequences set on Ferrix, there is something about like going out there. Like they're not mistaking the Scottish Highlands, which is where a lot of this episode was shot. You're not mistaking that for, Santa Barbara, or, it's these people, and they seem small and insignificant amongst these majestic green hills and valleys, but you feel like you're there, and in a world that's already, in a universe that's already very, pushing the boundaries of what's your suspension of disbelief and everything like that. It grounds you in a way, and it's an environment, again, Star Wars is limited, obviously. We're not going out into deep space to get this stuff. So, we have deserts, we have Tatooine and Jakku, and we have, Hoth is an ice planet. And, they can only do so much with sort of these natural biomes. But this does not look like an environment that we've spent a lot of time with, in 9 movies or so forth. Like, it has a distinct character all its own. And I applaud them for, whether it costs more money or not, to build the township in Ferrix, with sets and so that it feels like you can move from point A to point B, and navigate your way through. Or here, going out there and shooting for a month in these highlands and giving it that space, that epic scope. I think that was very good. I love the dynamic of the crew in the sense, we have the young idealist who believes in the cause with Nemec, and we have the sort of self-centered mercenary type in Skeen, and we have Cinta and Vel and Harriman, and we have an Imperial turncoat who's also risking his neck on the line. He's not too crazy about seeing Cassian there. And then, they've a little Doc Brown joke when they're showing off the plan. And they apologize. It's not built to scale, but again, if you're a fan of this type of storytelling, it's great when they say, all right, at 1800 hours we will be here, and then we will take this shuttle, and in there is a hangar bay, and we will deactivate the alarms, and it all sounds, when they're describing it, like, well, what could possibly go wrong? And of course, in the back of our heads, we realize that, well, if it's going to work that smoothly, then we probably don't have a show. So, and that leads me to, we get into the Imperial Security Bureau, we get into the heist, we get into Mon Mothma's complicated marriage and her position in the Senate. We get into, with the exception of Cyril and his buddies at the corporate authority who are demoted and dressed down and as the Empire takes over their system. None of the characters that we've spent 3 episodes getting to know on Ferrix, or Kenari, where Cassian was, abducted by Marva and her husband Clem. Like, I know we watch a lot of TV. Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is a bold example of one of our shows that we like to do here at Pending Rebrand. And we've had episodes where Christopher Pike has been, not featured, either out of the picture entirely or does a brief cameo, and the main thrust of the story is Spock or any of the other supporting characters there, number 1. But this is a whole different paradigm. Like, the show that we thought we were watching for the first 3 episodes, at least at the moment, is not the show we're watching right now. And it's seamless. That you talk about taking a creative risk. They didn't do a time jump 30 years later. Andor's, they literally just switched locations, brought in a whole bunch of new characters, like a great novel or, you know, literary piece, and just expect you to stay ahead of the wave and roll with it. Now, does that mean we will never return to that junk world? You know, I don't want to spoil things, but there's a fair bet we might see that planet again. But like I say, it's just, we went from the excitement and high stakes of them fleeing Ferrex to this a completely different thing. There are no blasters fired in here. There's no fisticuffs or, you know, lightsaber battles or again, we have a TIE fighter that screams by overhead on patrol that scares the dickens out of you when you're listening on your soundbar at home. But the show is immensely compelling without any of the usual fallbacks. Like, you know, Andor gets into a fight with his fellow heist mates, you know, and they brawl right by the campfire. Or, I mean, it's a show that trusts you enough to think that the office standoff between Dedra and her cohorts is just as exciting as Luthen and Cassian blasting their way out of a room filled with heavy machinery. And it can do both very well. But you don't need to rely on one or the other to get you there. And in this case, the most exciting edge-of-your-seat stuff is what characters are thinking and saying to each other. And like I say, this isn't even Tony Gilroy. It's his brother Dan doing this, and he's just as up to the task as his sibling. So that's where I come off on that. When you can make a show exciting just about whether or not she's going to get to, you know, investigate the star path, even though it's not her sector, like that's, you know, it's money.
Hats off. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I hate to say we've belabored this episode. I don't think we have, but I think it's a great time to offer up our ratings on our patented Graying Jedi lightsaber color scale. I'll kick off this week because I think as the newcomer fresh face to the series, I probably have tipped my hat pretty early how I felt about this episode. I give it a blazing green lightsaber. I'm going to say Yoda in episode 2 green.
That's great.
Which is high praise. I thoroughly loved this episode. Everything top to bottom tantalized me in all the right literary ways. From seeing the dressing down of our trio of officers that kind of got the pooch effed on them by their actions and or inactions. It's kind of nice to see the bad guys get their comeuppance, but then you sort of realize that they're also human and maybe on their way to radicalization. And I'm a big fan of layers and nuance, whether it's the onion of Shrek or the great layering of Shakespearean flicks like Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. As I believe we mentioned Emma Thompson earlier, so can't not mention Kenneth Branagh in the same breath. I know they're not together anymore, but they'll always be one in my eyes. I loved it. I loved every minute of this episode, from the drums on down, because it was, again, this feels like exactly what I think my heart has always wanted out of Star Wars. A much more realistic feeling, nuanced, adult, again, divorce yourself from the connotations of that word when it comes to entertainment. Not that that's a bad thing either, but this is very much a let's do our taxes type show. Like it entertains you on a sort of deeper, more stimulating level that I think a Star Trek really does a good job of. So to see that in the Star Wars universe is very satisfying for me.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I think we're seeing the evolution. I think we're seeing the evolution of Star Wars. I think we're seeing it here, and I think we're starting to see it with Ahsoka. Obviously on different levels in a sense, right? We're seeing it with our heroes, and we're seeing it with those everyday people that become heroes, right? They're not predestined like we had seen with Star Wars. So yeah, I give it a green glowing lightsaber as well. Obviously, it's my second time viewing, and it's better than the first, to put it mildly. I know where it's going, and it just continues to build in a phenomenal way. So, yes, Episode 2 Yoda lightsaber. Go ahead, Psyllium Maas.
So I don't like to mix metaphors, but I can think of no finer way to illustrate the color. This is my prized Great Northern Hotel Twin Peaks room key, room 315. And as you can see, it is a deep Pacific Northwest forest green, so clearly earning that's accolades there. And I just want to say further that maybe this is just an interesting off-ramp in the Star Wars superhighway. And again, we've talked about where Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau and other creators, may take the show. And we may be surprised. I think we're going to be surprised next year when we have such offerings as Skeleton Crew and The Acolyte, which are going to take some different tones and different looks. Again, moving sort of beyond the general Skywalker saga storylines. So I don't want to disabuse anybody and say, oh, I wish they made all Star Wars like this, because quite frankly, I think Star Wars is a big enough tent to embrace the mythology, to embrace the serialized adventure storytelling of the Flash Gordons and so forth that inspired George Lucas, and to begin with, the hero's journey that he set his characters on so long ago. Recently, Matthew Vaughn, who is the director of the Kingsman franchise and Kick-Ass and so forth, he's a talented director. I've enjoyed his work. Stardust he did with Michelle Pfeiffer and Robert De Niro, a very underrated fantasy picture. But he made some headlines recently by saying that he wants to reboot Star Wars, A New Hope. He thinks that Star Wars should only be about the Skywalkers, but he thinks that it's time for a brand new take on Han Solo, Leia, Vader. And I mean, I guess that's probably a debate worth having down the road somewhere. But like I say, I don't think we do it justice to just try to limit, and I think sometimes fans get, a little greedy online. They only want Star Wars to be, Tony Gilroy, Examinations of Radicalization, or they only want Star Wars to be Ewoks and plush toys. And like I say, I think if you can embrace and wrap your arms around the storytelling that they're saying, that they're offering us, I think you can find room, for a well-balanced diet of this. And I by no means think that we're going to be getting a ton more of Andors, but Andor might inspire some different choices and some different risks, and that can only be good for the franchise as a whole. So you don't feel like we're plowing the same earth again and again and again. So I mean, my hat's off to Tony Gilroy and his collaborators so far as to what they've done. And like I say, maybe somebody else that just unlocks the door to something even more daring and unusual, and we're like, why didn't we think of that? So
you cannot reboot Excalibur. They tried to do it. You cannot reboot The Godfathers. You'll never do it. Don't even try it with Star Wars. But that's an argument we could have another day, probably.
Right.
Yeah, that could be a whole podcast.
Oh, yes, Gary.
We could do a whole podcast on movies that should never be rebooted. I'll start with Double Impact. How about City Slickers 2? Obviously, the world's best movie ever made, Street Fighter. And you should never reboot Brett Favre's career. That was timeless. Rebooting Star Wars is just that's a farce. Now, rebooting Star Trek V, we could talk. We'll talk about that maybe in a future episode of another show here at Pending Rebrand, which you subscribe if you haven't. Don't miss out on the Warp Core podcast. Don't miss out on future episodes of Us, the Graying Jedi. Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear. weekly, episodic, follows the NFL season, and someday,
we have so much more in store.
someday we'll have even more coming up.
Oh.
So don't sleep. Don't sleep on the Graying Jedi. Don't sleep on pending rebrand. Make sure, however, that when you subscribe, you don't only subscribe, but drop us what you think about Cassian Andor and his journey in the comments. Hit that like button, share button with all your friends, family, strangers, neighbors, and that guy at the gas station that has a cell phone who can stream us on YouTube and Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. I am UrzaMaster. With me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. We thank you from a galaxy far, far away to right here at home. May the Force be with you.